do?
Sure. So my name is Darryl Cheng, and I am the author of the new Plant Parents, a book I put over here.
It's all
This
for
book right
plugs. Yes,
here.
plugs.
Yes. So I'm the author of that book and also the creator of Houseplant Journal, which is an Instagram account that's just dedicated. Well, I mean, if we're going to go right to how it's all started, it was literally just a journal for me taking care of plants.
Wow, it's
And
quite
so
literal.
that's, yes. So um, I think the thing is like I just documented how my plants were growing, and you know how social media is, inevitably somebody else may have the same plants, and then they start asking you questions. Now the kind of smart alecky way of doing things would be like, well, you could just Google the answer, right? But no, I wanted to actually look at people's plants and say like, okay, how can I actually help them in some small way? And so you know I'm sure you can imagine now I'm seeing like thousands of questions, right? So it's like when you get the same kinds of questions thousands of times, then you start to ask yourself like how can the way that people are taught be different, right?
Mm.
So that's really how I came to start writing more about plant care. And basically what it is I when you read regular plant care advice, I think you tend to find that it has a tone of being like, here's a piece of decor and here's how you maintain it, right?
Like, how do you shine my
But
plant?
yeah, yeah. But I mean, I think for me that kind of made everything feel actually a little bit boring because you're kind of missing some parts of it, and so that's where I came to coin the sort of phrase that I call the ABC of houseplant appreciation. So that's A for the aesthetics; we can appreciate what they look like because they're beautiful. B is for biology because we appreciate how they grow and the way that they adapt to life, completely different from animals. And C is for companionship because I like to say plants can be your friends, right? Um, it's the same way that you connect with, you don't get a dog just so you can show it off on Instagram. You get a dog because provides you companionship, and so in much the same way, like if you just replaced some of my plants, like I would know because it's not the same one that I had all these years. Like this big staghorn fern behind me, it's hanging on the wall. I've had this plant for 5 years, and grew it from a small little pot. Like it's sentimental to me, right?
Yeah, it's you raised it pretty much.
That's right. Yeah. So it's like when you bring in all three of these facets of enjoying plants, then I think it makes the overall experience a lot richer and yeah, more rewarding.
Yeah, for sure. And I was doing I think what I found really interesting about how you approached it is because you literally, not, I don't want to have a pun here, but you did a kind of a grassroots effort of it where you had like lots of people getting in, like really enjoying the way that you were approaching it, and then telling, sharing, and following, and that's how you grew your community, I guess. And what I
Yep.
found most interesting is that you originally used to be an engineer before you started getting into plants. When did
Yeah,
you,
that's right.
yeah, when did you make the switch?
Well, so I guess I got let's go right back to like when it all started, right? So like I was still living at home with my parents. My mom said, help me decorate the house with some plants. Okay, and so I did. I just bought a bunch of plants, and then I tried to look up online how to take care, and then I just explained how I read plant care advice and realized this is really lacking in, first of all, science, and secondly, some sort of like how do you appreciate this in a long-term hobby, rewarding hobby kind of way, right? So that's kind of how my journal started. I posted pictures first on Tumblr and then on Instagram, and then that's where it all kind of began from. Like I was still working full time as you mentioned. I wasn't doing software development. I was doing business analysis.
Oh,
So
wow.
for a software company, and,
It's
and so
very
part of my job,
indoors kind of thing.
yeah, it was all very indoor stuff. Yeah. So, I mean, part of my job was actually to train clients on how to do things with the software. So it's sort of like in my nature to want to explain something the best way I possibly can, right? And that's where I realized that for houseplant care, it was being explained kind of like in the same old vanilla way all these years, right? Um, and so that's, yeah, I mean, then I, grew bigger and bigger on Instagram, and eventually a literary agent reached out to me and said, "Hey, I think you can write a really good book about this, so we should work on it together." And so we did, and then that's how, like, my book came about. And then, I mean, I was still working full time while I was writing this book, and then it was kind of funny because then the day that my book was released, March 2019, the next day, I went into my job, and me and my whole team of 20 people got laid off from our jobs.
No way.
Uh, yeah, yeah. I mean, I kind of knew it was coming, but like, still, it's still a shock, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Well, you literally had a
so,
book to fall back on, so.
well, yeah, I suppose that was the lucky part. And then, so then I said to myself, okay, I can either try and look for another business analysis job, or I could just try and see what doing this full time looks like, right? Doing the houseplant type of stuff. Like, how, I guess you could call it like houseplant education.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then, I decided I would try and go at it, excuse me, full time, and so that brought me to a lot of. First of all, you kind of make your own little kind of book tour. So I went around to different places in the U.S. Because I'm up in Canada, actually, in Toronto, and so I would go to different places, give little talks here and there, sign some books, and more importantly, like, meet people who I've been following and who follow me, and it was really kind of a fun thing to do. And then up until the pandemic hit, I was still traveling different places, but now obviously with many things locked down, then I just decided, okay, well, I'll maybe create like an online course of it. So that's, I also have that going for me right now, and yeah, so that's where the journey has taken me so far.
And do you remember what first plant made you kind of fall in love with kind of house plant
Yeah, yeah.
propagation and stuff like that?
Well, the first few plants that I got were like a money tree, which my mom still has right now, and yeah, that one plant is probably like the very, very first earliest one that I can think of, that she still has. You get a lot of plants along the way. Some of them die. Some of them grow to a really kind of gangly point that is no longer manageable. Some of them succumb to being overrun by pests, and then you decide, I don't want to fight this anymore, and you toss it out. Um, like, I think, I'm glad you asked me about that, because then, I have a saying about how, like, experienced plant parents, they're not the ones who just never lose a leaf and everything looks perfect all the time. They're the ones who understand, like, how much leaf loss is normal.
Mm,
Like, meaning to say that you will absolutely lose leaves. So don't be under this impression that proper care will give you perfect plants forever, right? That's the wrong idea, which unfortunately is kind of like implied when people read instructions. They think, okay, I'll just follow this, and then everything's going to be good, right? Everything's going to be fine. But I don't think anyone, I don't think enough people are out there, like, telling what owning a plant in a long term actually looks like,
yeah.
right? You see this plant here, the big staghorn. Actually, I can turn the camera a little bit for you.
Oh yeah. Oh
Like,
wow. It actually does
so
look like a
it's,
stag.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, that's why it's called a staghorn fern. It's like, I've had it for 5 years, but I can tell you for sure that every one of the leaves that you see on here right now, none of those were there when I first bought the plant. So it's like the leaf turnover is something that people need to understand. That is it's part of the experience.
And I think that reminds me quite of I live in Berlin, and we have a thing of like people will go away for the winter. Maybe not right now, but I had a friend who left his apartment to some other friends, and he gave them a guidebook, like a kind of a take care of my plants book of when to water which ones and when to not be worried when if a plant reacted in a certain way. So don't be
Yeah, yeah,
worried
yeah.
if like this one starts sulking or this kind of stuff like that. And it was like leaving how you would feed a cat or a dog. And it was just really detailed, like this is how much water you give and this is where you should don't move it to this room and don't let the cat eat this one kind of thing. And I
Yeah.
think this was sort of like you're kind of teaching people how to take care of their plants in an animal kind of way. I don't know.
Well, yeah, it's sort of like when people talk about taking care of animals, it's like because humans are in the same, animal family, right? We have a better understanding of when a pet reacts a certain way, they're throwing up or something, or they're not eating as much as they used to. Or they're limping, like like you as an animal as well know what that means, or you have a good sense of what that means.
Oh yeah, hopefully.
People, people or humans, they do not have as good a sense for what things a plant does, and like that. So it's like because we're so disconnected from how a plant works in its biology, then every little thing that looks imperfect causes people to worry, right?
Mm.
So it's like, but then what's even worse is then when people talk about how to take care of them, they talk about it from a human centered way. Like, oh, you don't like this yellow leaf? Well, maybe it's because of this, maybe because of that. Oh, it's the plant telling you that it's sad or something, right? And it's like, no, 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 no. Like the example I always give is like go into a forest and look in, like, I don't know. It's easier to do it with a tropical forest because tropical plants are typically the ones we have indoors, right? If you ever get a chance to go to a conservatory where there's like these, you know, like for example, like Monstera here, growing wild, then you'll see that there's brown tips everywhere. You'll see that there's yellowed leaves, here and there all the time. And it's like that's just part of how it grows, right? And the more that we are able to accept that this is how it is, then the less like perfection oriented we're going to be,
Mm.
right? We're going to be more accepting that nature is at work even inside your house, right?
Yeah, exactly. And what's like, on kind of jumping off that note, what's the most common question you get from people?
Well, most common question will be they'll take a picture of a yellowed leaf and they say, and they'll say, what's wrong with it? Or what am I doing wrong? Right? So then my response is always the same. I always have to ask the same follow-up questions, right? Number one is how long have you had the plant? Number two is you need to show me like the space where that plant has been growing. Because for me, I always um, like analyze light first. Light is the thing that drives the whole process to go, right? Um, like actually, yeah, this analogy will work well because you all like coffee. So
Yes.
like the coffee, but I'm okay. I'm going to talk about old drip coffee machine. Okay, like if you do all the stuff, you put the filter in, you put the grinds in, you measure out the right amount of water and everything, and then you just flip the switch and you walk away. If you didn't plug in the machine, it, nothing's going to work, right? No matter what you did, like how nicely you measured all that stuff, but it won't matter, right? For plants, it works the same way. There is no correct way to water a plant that is sitting in a dark corner because the whole system is not working. You're right. So
Yeah,
so
yeah,
that's sort
no.
of like
Yeah, it's
so
that thing
that's
of like
that's my
it needs that light and that kind of that sugar and stuff.
right.
Yeah.
Light is what drives the whole process of a plant to work. So if you're and then the second part is too that a lot of plant advice would say, oh, but this thrives in low light, or oh, this is great for a dark corner because it's indestructible. They always say, right? But I'm saying like no, no, no. If you think that a plant is any plant that people say thrives in low light, I always say no, no, no. It just dies slower and less noticeably than other plants, right?
It will just kind of just
So
like pop off all of a sudden kind of thing.
yeah,
Yeah.
but otherwise, some of them would be like, for example, snake plants. It is true that they'll basically be like green statues no matter where you put it. But the problem is just because on the outside the plant looks okay, it doesn't mean that it's actually working.
Mm.
And like clearly, if we talked about like we would never talk about we don't purchase a certain breed of dog because we ask, oh, which breed of dog do I need to feed the least,
Oh
right?
my God.
I mean, but logically, a small dog would be the one you feed the least, right? So like, but nobody does that with dogs, right?
Yeah.
And
Oh,
so,
no, I hope
but
not.
yet, yeah, I hope not. So for plants, it's like I know it's going to be a stretch if I was to say like we need to treat plants as animals. Like I understand that it's not the same, right? But I would say if you want your plants to do like their absolute best is going to be right in front of your largest window. And if you do not have large windows, then it means that your space is not conducive to a huge fiddle leaf fig. Like just don't buy it because you're going to be disappointed with what it looks like in a few months.
Yeah, it will not be there anymore, kind of thing. You'll have a nice pot of dirt. And
Yeah,
have you ever grown coffee plants before?
I've seen small coffee plants that people are selling as like house plants, but I've personally never done it only because I know that they require a lot of direct sun.
Yeah, and a lot, like quite a bit of heat as well.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, because
So the thing,
I think
well,
as
yeah,
like
one
a coffee
interesting
person,
thing is,
yeah,
yeah, as a coffee person or just any person who uses a certain plant for a certain specific purpose, like they're gonna have a certain mindset of how to take care of it, right? So coffee growers are typically grown like they're grown outside in the tropical regions. So their light concerns and their watering concerns are going to be completely different than somebody like me growing just your tropical houseplants. Like the conditions are just so different, and yet I would say the common language we use to talk about the different factors is not precise enough. Like I'm an engineer, so I need to be very precise, right? So if you would tell me about like you know the outdoor plants, their daily light integral is over 20, then inside I can say, well, then my indoor light is like only about 2 to 4. Now, okay, I know I just spewed a bunch of numbers here, right? But just the difference between 20 and 2, you have common sense 10 times more, right? So that means that outdoor plants are getting at least 10 times more light only because of the fact that they're not covered by ceilings and walls and windows.
yeah. And on
Yeah.
that note, because you did just spew a bunch of numbers, and there is a reason why you did, because you're very knowledgeable about it. I know that you developed a light meter app,
Hmm.
and how did,
Yeah. So
if you can just explain
yeah,
about that and how you, we're
sure,
very
sure. Like
curious about
so.
how you developed it as well.
Well, I mean, just because I kept talking about how, like, when people first start taking care of plants, the issue of light seems to be just like an afterthought or just one of the ingredients. Whereas I'm trying to say it is literally the electricity that powers the whole thing to work, right? So knowing that it's that important, I said, okay, well, why don't I have my light meter right here? It's like, why don't I just use a light meter and measure the ambient light around and just start, giving concrete guidance to say, okay, your pothos, quote unquote, is low light tolerant, but that's 100, like about 100-foot candles, and that's not going to be like way over in a corner far from your room. It's going to be still pretty close to your window. Um, so then, because a device like this looks a bit, awkward to be carrying around all the time. So then, me, and also because I used to work with, all these software developers, I was like, hey, why don't we just build an app, right? So then, yeah, I worked with one particular friend of mine on a light meter app, and that was released um, roughly like 2 years ago. But now there is sort of like one major flaw in terms of apps, and that is that on Android, there's no standardization of the hardware of the light sensor,
Oh,
right? So it means that the accuracy will be like will depend on what type of phone you have, right? Okay, and then the next question is, well, what about iOS, like Apple, right? Um, the issue with Apple is that you know whenever you build an app, it has to pass their certification or whatever to be in the App Store, right? So one of the requirements, or sorry, I should say restrictions of iOS development on apps is that the ambient light sensor is only allowed to be used by the the iOS operating system to modify the brightness of your screen, because that's how people have automatic, screen brightness adjustment. It's like if it's really bright outside, then they're going to make the screen maximum. If it's really dark, they're going to make the screen look not as bright, right? So the problem is on iOS, you're not allowed to tap into that number. Like I can't take that reading and then show it to you, which is what a light meter is, right?
Yeah.
So the issue I have on iOS is that you literally cannot use the light sensor to show you any light data. And so you're probably wondering, well, then what are current apps doing right now? Well, they're taking the camera brightness value and then doing their own sort of very rough interpolation from camera brightness number to like lux or foot candles. So basically, it's to say I just explained like the whole development thing, which is that apps like light meter apps are good enough to give you an idea. It's better than just using your eyes, but using a dedicated meter, it is going to be far more precise. And also, like, when you're dealing with natural light, if you really like, there's some people who maybe don't want to use a light meter because maybe they're just not interested, right? Of course, I love measuring things, so I mean, I even have a spectrometer because I just think it's fun. But if you're dealing with natural light indoors, the answer is simple. You just have to put it right in front of the window, and only if the sun is going to actually shine through, for a duration longer than 2 or 3 hours, then the ideal thing to do is to block it with a white sheer curtain. Because when you pull the plant away from the window, then not only are you, let's say cutting down the angle where the sun can touch it, but you're also closing off the view of the sky. Like
it's not quite direct then, is it?
Well, it's like you're closing off what I call like the angle of the view of the sky. So I mean, I don't know, is this number for you the right side way, like 37, right?
037. 036.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, it's sort of the right way. It's not. It's the opposite way.
Like if I, what I'm doing with the sensor right now is I'm putting it closer to the window. Okay. So what is the number for you now? 50? Is it?
It is 53.
Okay, right. So now if I move my hand closer and closer, meaning farther from the window, you see the number reducing?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that means even within my arm's length, the light reading can be halved. Then that's why if you move your plant farther from the window, you're really cutting down the amount of light that it gets. And the amount of indirect light is proportional to the physical view of the sky. Like that's why I keep telling people like it has to be right in front, because it's the angle of the sky that's giving you this indirect light. If you move it farther back without using a light meter, you won't even know whether, on the other side of your room, it could be down to like 20 foot candles, and then you're wondering why your pothos is not growing.
Yeah, pretty much. Like I think it's one of those things where if you're talking to the good company to talk to about measuring stuff is a scale company like us. So we definitely know what you're talking about. And
yes,
yeah, we're quite obsessed with accuracy and measuring stuff. So we get your dedication to the cause.
So yes, I'm speaking to the right people then.
Yeah, but like we have scales, but you never know. Maybe in the far future, we can do like a light meter.
Well, here's the interesting thing too about scales too. Like so then of course I just talked about accuracy of a light meter, right? And then there's this type, which is like, okay, this is a bit more accurate than a phone, but then there's something even more accurate, which is called a quantum sensor or a par meter sometimes, right? And the thing is, whenever, even like on the analogy of a scale, right? You have this thing, what's called like if the scale is legal for trade, right? Versus just a casual scale, you're measuring, your food before you to eat, I don't know, number of calories or something like that, right? Like, those types of scales don't have to be, trade legal. But of course, if you're going to talk about weighing, I don't know, ounces of diamonds when you trade it for millions of dollars, well, then you need a scale that's going to be like,
yeah, you
certified somehow, right?
You need a commercial scale. One, yeah.
Right. So what I'm saying is light meters, there's the same kind of deal. If you're gonna like, where is it? Like I have my spectrometer here, right? This one here. Like this light meter is like way more accurate, and it even gives me, I can just measure some light here.
Oh wow.
It even gives me like the spectrum, right? So this kind of accuracy is really unnecessary for a hobbyist, right? But I just like that's I I'm an engineer, so
Yeah,
I
you
just
love the
like this
science
kind
of
of
it.
thing, right? Yeah. So then doing it that way is worthwhile. A meter like so. By the way, that meter out there is like $1,000, right? Um, this one here is like in the $50 to $100 Canadian range, right? And so it's a lot more reasonable, and like this is what I would call like sufficiently accurate in order to help you understand where should I put my plants. That's what this is for, right? A spectrometer would be like if you're writing a scientific paper and you need to know like the actual blue red ratio or whatever, right? So like we have to make sure that the sort of like the application is clear, that we know that this is for this and that one is for that, and so then we're not always trying to say like, well, no, you have to be super accurate, you have to use a spectrometer. Like you don't have to, right?
Yeah.
But
And
I'm interested to know as a coffee maker of very accurate scales, what would be your pitch to say like, what makes a coffee better if you measure out exactly everything?
well, yeah, for us, I think it's the same with it's with plants. It's like you if you keep doing the same thing again and again that and you have good results, stick with that plan and just and
Mm.
things like scales and things like understanding light and humidity and all these kind of things will let you recreate that good situation. And I think that's exactly what you're doing is that you're not every household or every apartment or anything is the exact same. So all plants shouldn't be treated equally.
Yes, you touched on a really good point there, which was that yes, nobody's like you say, nobody's windows are exactly the same size. Nobody's like outdoor obstructions are exactly the same. So therefore, plants are beautiful because they will adapt to whatever situation they're going to grow in. But then we also have to accept that therefore they're not going to look the same as somebody else's, right? Like I had the good fortune of being able to put like a very powerful light sensor that actually logs the data over many days. I was able to put one of these sensors into my friend's house, and my friend has floor to ceiling windows that are almost 20 feet high and the spanning his whole wall, right? And then I was able to visually analyze from the data that the light equivalent in his apartment was almost the same as like a nursery's, whereas mine was like a tenth of it, right? So that means regardless of our skill level, his plants will always look more full. They'll always look better because all he has to do is remember to water it.
Yeah. How quickly did you try and like exchange apartments at that point?
Well, I mean, my current apartment right now is like, I really like it because I'm in this room right now here. You can see it's like windows all around.
Oh, nice. Yeah, that's lots and
So,
lots of plants. I was gonna ask
yeah,
actually
like,
what your favorite plant is, or like what plant are you proudest of at the moment?
um, yeah, I'd say the staghorn fern is like probably like one of my top ones. And then the second one, close second, would be like, I'm just gonna move my phone here. Like this monstera behind me.
That is giant.
Yeah, it's taking up half the room, so it's pretty. I've dedicated a lot of space for it.
It seems like it needs it, which is good. And I just got a question as well. The meters that are 3-in-1 with the prongs. This question from, so I have Jen who's part of my team, and she's very into plants as well. And she says that
Mhm.
she doesn't see much of a change in the levels of light and reading.
Oh,
Yes,
like
those
these?
ones, I think.
Yeah, these are garbage.
Okay, she got her answer.
Well,
So
well, okay. First, let me qualify that to say that first of all, a moisture meter. The whole idea of a moisture meter is sort of like saying the only factor I need to care about is whether the soil is wet or dry, and let's say 10 levels of that for some reason, and that's the only thing I care about. But my example would be, if you put your plant in a dark corner, your moisture meter will eventually say dry, and then you say, okay, it's time to water. I water it, I wait and wait and wait and wait, and then it eventually reads dry again, and then I water it. But all this time, your plant is just slowly dying in the corner. And just because you're following the moisture meter to say, oh, I'm supposed to water it, like I'm watering it when it reaches number 5 or whatever, right? Like that whole process doesn't address the fact that the plant's not working. On the other hand, if I'm putting all my plants right against the window, and you only need to check between 3 different levels of dryness, which is number 1 is keep the soil evenly moist. Number 2 is water when it's partially dry. And number 3 is water only when the soil is totally dry. All plants is only one of these 3 types of ways to water a plant. So you put the plant where it has the best light and then follow one of these 3. And then that's what I say is like, that's the best the plant will do, is if you just do it that way. I'm not guaranteeing that it's going to be perfect. I'm also not guaranteeing that it's going to, that you're going to like what it looks like after a year or 2 years. But you see, that's up to you, right? It's your decision whether you think that, like for me, I'm always looking at my plants as like, this is just how it grows. And you can intervene at some point, like, you cut it or something like that. But the fact is, we should not assume that following some instructions will yield, a perfect, aesthetically pleasing plant, your aesthetically, idea of what's pleasing plant forever. Like, because plants are growing and they're changing. And so it means that you're going to have to deal with change at some point.
Yeah. So just like, it's like all these questions, there's so many questions about plants that I'm sure you get asked all the time. But I'm going to ask you
Yep.
like kind of a little bit more of a general question. And that
Yep.
I'm sure you get questions all the time from people who are starting off with plant collections, or they're seeing it all over social media, and go ahead and buy a plant that they're not quite sure how to grow and how to care for. What would be like,
Mhm.
coming up to the holiday seasons, what would be the plants you would recommend for starter green thumbs or blooming green thumbs, if that's the right term
I
to
mean,
say?
it's like, I think different categories of plants can perform different roles of, how they change the vibe of your space, right? So something like a pothos or a philodendron, they're like nice, very long, like pothos right here, right?
Yeah,
Nice
that one's
long
just here
vines.
actually.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So they're
This
very
guy.
nice. Yeah, yeah, nice one. Nice long vines that drape over a shelf or something. Provided that that shelf is somehow close to a window, then it'll do okay. And that's one. And of course, there's so many types that if you just bought 2 or 3 of those, then you would already have like a very jungly, looking space, right? So pothos and philodendron are 2 very good starter plants, I would say. If you're looking for something that what I call like the green statue, like it almost barely changes ever, is like a snake plant or the Sansevieria. There's lots of different types. Um, yeah, and again, because there's lots of different types, you can just get a whole 4 or 5 different types, and then you already have like a little forest of them, right? Um, and so let's talk about those 3 ways to water again, right? So again, as long as these plants are reasonably close to your window, then of the 3 ways that I just talked about, which is keep the soil evenly moist, that's not really going to be suitable for these types of plants. Pothos is in the strategy of water when partially dry. So that means when I say partially dry, you're taking like a chopstick or your finger, but I usually use a chopstick, which is easiest. You're just like kind of probing around the soil to feel that it's roughly like halfway to 2/3 dry. And what I mean by fully, like meaning what's 100%, that's right after you water, when the soil is completely soaked with water, that's 100%, right?
Yeah.
Right. So that's why I only need a chopstick or just to lift the pot in order to test the dryness of the soil. right? And that's really the level of precision you need for judging soil dryness. So it's like this. I'm very precise with light because I know that it's highly variable. But the soil dryness, like your sense of weight and your probing around the soil, that's accurate enough to tell you whether when it's time to water. And then, sorry, the third type of snake plants, right? The Sansevieria, that one is you water when the soil is completely dry. So like it could almost be as hard as a rock, right down to the core before you need to water a snake plant again.
Those that sound like the plants you can like leave over the holidays and not be too worried about them. Like
Yeah, yeah.
you'll
So I mean,
resurrect them pretty easy.
yeah, like a few years ago when my wife was still studying university, then like because it was in another town 2 hours away, I'm not going to drive back and forth there. She came back for 3 weeks, and so we decided, okay, the snake plant can stay there, the pothos can stay away from the window because I. So the thing is, when you start to understand that light is what drives the water usage, then when I want the water usage to slow down, then I move it away from the window. So, for example, when I left for 3 weeks, I just soaked the pothos, to 100%, and then I moved it like between two windows so that it wasn't really directly in front of the window, right? On the other hand, for the snake plant, I soaked it, but then because the snake plant grows so slowly and it can wait until the soil is totally dry again, I kept it in the window, right? And so then the snake plant was fine and the pothos was fine as well.
Nice. Yeah, you just kind of put them on pause even in a way.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So I was gonna see what questions, because we've actually got loads of questions people are sending. I think this is a pretty like general one. Winter growth tips. Do you have any general
Mhm.
ones?
Well, I would say that, winter, even when we say winter, right, it varies by latitude a lot, right? And what I mean is like the length of your daylight is different depending on your latitude. So I know that for myself in Toronto, my days are roughly 15 hours, like from sunrise to sunset is roughly 15 hours in the summer, but it gets short as like about 9 hours in the winter, right? But of course, the higher up you go, the shorter your winter, like the shorter your daylight gets in winter, right? So I guess I can say that when I speak for myself at my latitude, then when I say that, my plants are generally fine, I don't really have to change anything. But that's because when I say I don't change anything, it's not that I don't water less frequently. It's that in my mind, my strategy is I water when the soil reaches a certain dryness. And if that time frame happens to get longer, I don't need to keep track of that because my mindset is just do it with this sort of like, if then condition, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um, so like I'm not following any kind of strict schedule. I never keep track of when I water the plants because I just look at their soil and I know whether it needs to be watered or not. And because they're in the window, I know they're still working. Like if I put a plant far from the window and I'm still judging about when to water when it's dry and whatever, but it's just slowly dying. There's no point in even talking about how to take care of it because it's just dying.
I like how you the way that you phrased it was like speaking of from my latitude. I think that was a really nice phrasing of it. It's like you're
Yeah,
saying,
yeah.
like if you read any coffee bean bag, they always say this bean came from this latitude. So I like the way
Mm.
that you can say it from like the people who are growing it as well. You can go, oh, you can just do this way. Do you have any other tips, like how I'm sure like because most of us have tropical plants indoors, probably not leaving windows open too long.
Oh yeah. So yes, absolutely. Like, you know, it's a good time to sort of like evaluate your windows and make sure there's no like little drafts or anything, like meaning cracks or something in the frame or whatever, right? And like whenever people say to me, "Oh, what if there's a little draft?" and I would say, "Well, I think you should fix that, not just for the sake of your plants, but just for the sake of your saving energy in your house, that you're not heating a room that's constantly getting colder,
Yeah, you don't want
right?"
that.
Yeah. And then also like the issue of humidity again. But of course, like because we talk about measuring, I always know what the humidity actually is for my room. So, right now it's 45%, which is not bad. Um, if you're living in a place that in the winter can get down to like 20 or 10% humidity, then you probably would do well also for your own skin to have a humidifier for the room, right? Now, for myself, I don't use a humidifier because I know that my humidity will never get, even in the winter, never get much lower than, okay, like 30 or 25%.
Wow.
And most of these plants that I see here, like they're okay. So I'm not going to fret over the humidity on them.
Yeah, it's very different here. We got very, very dry, cold in here in the
Okay, so
winter.
see, for you then, it's like I would rather make the suggestion only if it's backed with data or backed with measurement. So it's like, okay, if it gets down to 10%, then you can fairly say yes, it's quite dry. I should get a humidifier. But I think the problem is people are just blanket statement. Oh, it's dry in the winter, and then everyone buys a humidifier. But like maybe it's not even necessary, or like it's like it's better to be informed about like what the number actually is, so that that way we can make a more, I guess, like concrete decision.
Mm. And on the subject of kind of your background in engineering and your kind of your you how much you enjoy the science of plants and biology, have you ever run your own experiments? Like, have you ever had like the same plants and kind of like change the variables around them and saw that?
Yes, I did like a very like home experiment sort of thing where like I bought four small Dracaena plants, right? They're just small plants, and two of them I put right in front of the window, and two of them I put far from the window. And then for the other for one pair of like close and far from the window, I then watered I watered the soil on a strict like every 4 days schedule, and then the other pair, I watered according to my own my own knowledge of how I should water it, when it reached certain dryness, right? And every single day I would weigh the pot, like I weighed the whole pot, and that is to say I was looking at the change of uh, water that was going to be based on both um, light intensity, but also like my own just you know watering schedule of it, right? And I mean, I knew what I was going to find, which is that the plants that were close to the window, they like their dryness level, like they dried out faster, right? Because in front of the window, the plant, you're getting both the evaporation effect of just your ambient temperature, humidity, but you're also getting the effect of the plant's own transpiration, like sucking up the water through the roots and everything, and doing photosynthesis and all that, right? Whereas the plants that were far from the window, they dried out a lot slower, but yet they were in the same room, so therefore it was almost like saying this is the baseline level of evaporation that happens from soil.
Did you
But
use a scale
what
for
was different? Yeah, yeah. Like every day I weighed the plant.
that?
Yeah. So then it was like I was just trying to show that the plant's biological activity changes, the dryness of the soil, and it causes it to dry out faster.
Yep. Good. And for you, how do you obviously have expensive gear to check the humidity of your rooms, but how would you do it if you didn't have all the equipment?
Oh, well, actually, I mean, I don't know if you would call this expensive. I think it's like, $20, right? But like the instruments that I use for temperature and humidity are not that expensive. The ones I use for light are a lot more expensive. Because as I said, like I want to be more precise about light because that's the one factor that nobody really kind of puts any kind of concrete numbers to, right? Like temperature and humidity, everybody's used to saying like, okay, this temperature, that humidity. Um, yeah, and so like I would rather put more effort into the factor that, well, is both more important and secondly is talked about less.
Mm, yeah. And for you, do you have any pet peeves about plants? Or like kind of or like kind of like your general kind of how you plant? I don't know.
Uh, I guess so whenever I buy a new plant, right? Like I'm trying to see, okay, whether or not I can have a good long-term relationship with this plant, right? So, it, well, it almost works the same way as with like even human relationships. But like, you know, sometimes a plant just looks really good right when you buy it. And then even if you give it the best possible conditions, like I have grow lights that are very powerful and I can keep them on for as long as I want. Um, and of course, like because I'm now constantly home, I can always know when to water them and everything. And like even if I do all that, and after let's say 6 months, they're just kind of growing gangly, or the new leaves that come out are just not as nice as the old ones, then I sort of say to myself like, okay, well then maybe the long-term potential of this plant is actually not that good. Like, but on the other hand, something like the staghorn, it's like I've given it the best possible conditions, but every year and every day even, like it's growing better and it's getting, I'm accepting the level of leaf turnover that happens, like older leaves dying, because I know that's normal. Um, but the overall experience is still positive and constantly building. Then I'm like, okay, then this plant, yes, has good long-term potential. And like same as the Monstera, has great long-term potential. Um, so that's sort of, I guess we could say, my pet peeve is like when people sell plants, they're selling you plants based on what they look like right now, because that's what attracts you to buy it, right? But no, I have never seen a single plant seller who would tell you, okay, this plant, you should expect the leaves to last 8 to 12 months. Afterwards, those leaves will die and then new ones, take their place. Um, on the other hand, something like a Monstera, okay, those leaves, they last, 2 to 5 years. Like they can keep, the whole leaf itself stays around for that long. And then therefore that's, a nicer long-term plant. So it's like sellers don't really tell you this. I mean, not to say that they're trying to hide anything, but it's just that that's not the way that you would market a plant.
Yeah. Would you say that like a lot of like plant sellers would be knowledgeable about the plants they're selling?
That's a good question, because the thing with that a plant seller's main goal is to just sell the plant as quickly as possible the moment that it is quote unquote ready, right? So somehow I would doubt whether some of these plant sellers have actually grown that particular plant, you know, after the point that it's ready to be sold, and then looking at the long-term performance of that plant in a home setting, not in their nursery, in a home setting,
Yeah.
right? So some sellers do have that experience, but other ones, if they're just commercial growers, they may have never seen what that plant looks like after 2 years in a home.
So would you recommend, where would you recommend people to buy their plants from? Like, because you can buy them from supermarkets or and such different places. Like they're kind of that thing where you can buy them beside the bouquets and stuff. Would you recommend people to buy them from there or from other places?
I would say it's best to buy it from a place where the people who sell the plants, they actually care that you do well with them, right? So meaning to say that in a supermarket, you're not there to buy plants, so they don't really care about how well you do with them. Of course, I'm not saying like obviously maybe someone who works in the floral department could be very knowledgeable. But I'm saying in general, right? Like if you go to a plant shop, like a specialty plant shop, which I'm really happy now that there's just so many of them, it's like you can trust that the people who work there, they really know what they're talking about. And maybe they've even had some long-term experiences with certain plants, so they can kind of give you that, very specialized, experiential kind of advice for you, right? And then another place too would be just like your nurseries, that they grow plants there, like where the plants actually grow. Because for example, a plant shop, they don't necessarily produce the plant there; it's produced at a nursery, right? So another place, if you go to the nursery, well then there you're going to have like amazing selection. Like you'll see, sometimes I spend like hours just if I want a particular plant, and then they have 50 of them, well, then I'm going to end up spending quite a bit of time looking at the plants, looking very closely at their, structure and everything, their kind of character, then see which one I like.
Yeah. Oh no, that's like it's just something you always see. The kind of thing of like we probably in the industry would be like, oh, be careful of kind of bags of coffee that don't have an expiration date and that kind of thing of
Oh, okay.
yeah, like you should try and avoid coffee that doesn't have an expir that doesn't avoid coffee that doesn't have an expiration date. And it's probably that same thing of like you probably shouldn't buy plants that are in like look a certain
So
way.
yeah, like if you so back to the like the big box stores and the grocery stores, it's like if they get a fresh shipment of plants, then those plants are probably fine. But the thing is, they'll just keep it there, and I talked about the light thing is like if they're sitting in the grocery store at such low light levels, and trust me, it's low. It's after like 1 week, some plants start to look not so great, and then they think that they just water and everything will be fine again. Well, yeah, maybe the plant will perk up, but still the plant has been now like, 1 week without photosynthesizing, now 2 weeks. Uh, maybe some start to develop pests and everything, and then like if the person's not careful, they don't realize that it's there, then they bring the pest home with them kind of thing. So it's like the nursery or the plant shop will be far more keenly aware to watch for these things and be more proactive with actually, fixing it before it becomes a bigger problem. Whereas in a grocery store, if a whole bunch of plants just start looking not so good anymore, you know, unfortunately, if someone have bought it already, but otherwise they'll just be like, okay, just throw these all away and get a new shipment, right? That's what they do in the grocery stores.
So I'm just gonna quickly get one more question before we finish. Um, I guess this will be like the last one, and it's more of a, I guess it's like the people growing their own. Do you have any tips for cutting of plants, time frame to pot them et al?
Hmm. Yeah. So earlier when I talked about the pothos, like the big long ones, right? One of the really fun things you can do with them is that you cut them, and then the cuttings you can put them in water, watch a little root come out, and then you basically can pot that into soil, and it'll go on to grow another plant, right? That's like plant propagation. So uh, in terms of timing, like you can just when you clip off the plant and you stick that into water, then like the moment that you see any little bit of white roots coming out, which could take anywhere from like 2 weeks to sometimes if it's really like let's say if it's not ideal temperature, it could take a month or something, right? Um, the moment that you see some white roots coming out, then you can pot it into soil. Uh, However, if you're sometimes like me procrastinating, you can just let it keep growing the roots longer and longer. I've I've kept plants in water for almost a year and a half, and then decided to pot them. And you can pot them up, and they're still going to do fine. Now, I always say they'll do fine, but that's because I'm making sure again that I'm measuring the light so that they're going to grow well when they eventually go to soil.
Nice. And so just before finishing off, just because I'm just gonna get you to mention your book again and your app because we had a few people asking.
Oh, sure. So, yeah, my book here is called The New Plant Parent, and it's just it's like I mean I took all the photos in here too as well,
Oh, nice.
and so it's like photos of my actual plants, um, sometimes over even a few years, and I think the strength of doing it that way is to say like you also can have a long-term relationship with some plants, right? And I think that's I don't know, more worthwhile than just showing you like one picture and say, okay, this is Monstera, and then boom, 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 how to take care of it. Like I actually show you here's my real Monstera. Here's what it looks like, a year later. Here's what it looks like 3 years later, and I think that's I don't know a more realistic view of how people take care of plants. Um,
I think it's a more
and then
reassuring
in
way
terms
as well.
Yeah, it is. It is. It's sort of like reassuring you that your experience with plant care will be varied. Some plants will die on you, some plants will grow well, and some plants will just grow to a shape that you can't manage anymore. And all of that is part of it, right? And I think if we talk about everything, then people's expectations for what should happen will be, I don't know, more realistic. And then in terms of the app, It's called HPJ, so Houseplant Journal, like the initials HPJ, light meter app. And unfortunately, it's only available on Android, but that's because of all that stuff I talked about with the iOS problems. But I mean, if I'm going to say if you really want to understand the light, get a light meter. Um, it's like this. If you in your mind were willing to spend money on a moisture meter
Yeah.
or any kind of thing like device to help you, a light meter device will immensely help you with plants because then you will have a solid understanding. Okay, where should I put the plant where it'll do okay? And then maybe the next question will be, well, then where can I find out the numbers for how much light foot candle light that each plant could take? On my website, I have an article called Bright Indirect Light Requirements by Plant, and it's a big long table with all a bunch of different plants, and they're based on both my observation but also like commercial nursery recommendations. Now, what you have to realize is that you'll realize that the indoor light will never reach commercial level. So if you're looking at more at like what I call like minimum for growth or like good growth, like that's sort of like more realistic numbers for what you can achieve indoors.
Nice.
And that's on my website. It's called houseplantjournal.com.
Yeah, and then also you've got your Instagram and your YouTube. You got loads of social media, so I think everyone should try and find Darryl that way. So I want to thank you so much for joining us this morning, evening, wherever anyone is watching us.
Yes.
I hope you have a great day, and I'm sure you're gonna there's been lots of questions, and I'm sure that they're gonna be sent on to you as well. But thank you again.
Yeah. Do send them over. Yeah, I'll try and answer them in stories or something like that.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Darryl.
Yeah.
And thanks everyone for
All right,
watching.
thank you.
See you later.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.